turn on record. Okay, everybody, we're now on camera. So did you guys all get a prompt telling you you're on camera? Yeah, okay, so now you've got this prompt saying you're on camera. You get to choose whether you want to keep your videos on. I certainly appreciate it if you do, but I understand if you won't. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie. Stephanie, I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, thank you so much for coming in. Steph and I'll just give you guys a little bit of background. We went to university together, so we've known each other for a long time. And now we're both middle-aged moms with careers. Yeah. We've diverged, but only slightly. Stephanie actually also taught at a CEGEP for a little while. She and I both did studies in geography. And Stephanie went on to do some work on a PhD at Carleton University and moved on to politics. And so, Steph, why did you become a city councillor?
Why did I? It started by being a mom. So when I was pregnant, things got a little difficult in the last months. Taking the bus was really hard. I live in one of the central neighborhoods in Montreal. So I walk, I bike, I bus, and taking the bus was pretty hard. Nobody would offer their seats. It was the dead of winter. I didn't feel safe biking in my last few months of pregnancy because there weren't enough protected bike lanes. And then I had my child, and then things changed again. I stopped going to half of the businesses I used to go to because I couldn't go with my stroller. I could no longer take public transit during rush hour because strollers don't fit and you don't always want to carry your child the whole day. Like, the solution of carrying your child is really an individual solution, which can work every once in a while, but it's ridiculous to ask of all parents to carry their child when we could just order more buses. What else? I started going to parks a lot with my kid, and I started sort of studying parks just because I was there every day. And I ended up being a stay-at-home mom for 2 years. So I had a lot of opportunity to see how children interacted with the city, because I would also observe daycare groups in the parks, because there was no more parents. After the age of 1, children go to daycare. You're sort of like the lone stay-at-home mom or parent in the park. So I didn't have any moms to talk with anymore. So I would just observe every season. And I thought, geez, the city really isn't made for kids that age. And then I started projecting when Tom will be 5, when Tom will be 10, when Tom will be 15, how will he engage with the city? How is the city made for him or not? And so when Tom was 6 months, so I was having all these reflections. And when he was 6 months, I thought, I'm going to become a member of a party, because parties talk about everything. Because I had looked into different organizations to volunteer, but they all had specific mandates. And I was kind of hyperactive and wanted to touch on everything. So I became a party member, and then things just kind of happened without really planning for it. I was a member, then I became a volunteer, and then I became a super volunteer. And in 2017, when the party was looking for women, people would look at me and say, we're looking for women. They'd look at me the way I'm looking at my camera and looking at you now. We're looking for women. And I would look behind me, very typical thing, like, oh, they must be talking about some other woman. And it happened several times. And then I thought, well, maybe I could be a counselor. So I kind of eased into it. Like, we ease into the pool, slowly testing the waters. I thought, I talked about it with my husband. Is this something we should do? Because it involves your whole family. And I decided that why not try it once? If I don't like it, I don't continue. So I ran in the 2017 election and won. And it turns out that having really grounded knowledge about your neighborhood speaks to people. They really also live their neighborhood in a really grounded way and have experiences of it. So it's a common ground. And I think that's what, for me at least, I think that's what helped me convince people at the door, to check my name on the ballot, in addition to my party affiliation, of course. So that's why I ran, to make the city better for children, also for women, because my experience as a pregnant person was pretty visceral. So those were the two main things.
Good. Okay, so thanks. So how your educational background, right? So I'm a little bit aware of it because we have very similar educational backgrounds, but can you tell them a little bit about it? And can you explain how it did or did not prepare you for what you did as a city councillor?
Yeah, I think social sciences are a wonderful preparation for politics. So, like, what am I supposed to call you here, Geneviève?
You can call me Geneviève, that's fine.
Like Geneviève said, we studied geography at Concordia. I did an undergraduate in geography. And in geography, we study concepts of space, place, landscape, scale, sustainability. Today, you'll be looking at. And all of those things help me every day in how I work. And then I did a master's in geography at York. And there I studied, my master's thesis was on how Algerians without legal status, so refugee claimants, how they use the city to make political claims or to claim their rights. And then I did a PhD in politics, and I found politics to be really, in a way, the least helpful of my studies for politics, because while we looked at institutions and theories of power, that wasn't a lens to better understand the world, really. It's not by understanding institutions that you're going to bring a rich, this is my view, by the way. Please go on to study politics if you love politics. Tons of people who study politics are in politics. But for me, geography was a really rich way of seeing the world, and I could bring that to bear on decisions. And because there's a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of business people, there are, who else, there's sort of typical trajectories, and I think having social science people there is only beneficial. Really, it really is, because you can only see what you know, in a way. Like, if you don't know about stuff, I don't know how you can see it, literally. How do you see it? So the more diverse the people are in politics, and their trajectories and their studies and their life histories, then the better decisions will be. So I really veered off course there, but I studied social science.
No, it totally worked because I asked you how you thought it would prepare you for your job as well. And
Right.
so that knit very well into the fabric of our discussion here.
It's like when I study space, I'm like, who's in this space? Who's not in this space? And the absence is always really important. And then I try to see, okay, are those people somewhere else? And then make connections and better understand that space. Like, what's happening here? And then I bring that in conversations with my colleagues.
Yeah, that's okay. So we have another geography class. This one isn't on environmental issues, but I also teach a class on urban environment. And a lot of what we discuss there is going to be on, or a certain section of it at least, is who uses what part of the space. And we go out and we do this exercise where I like take my students out and we identify who is using different spaces. We go to like 3 different spaces in the city and we just literally number people. You're like, okay, how many students are there? How many business people? And that's one of, I think, the most fun exercises that we do together as a class, because you literally just go out and experience it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Okay, so, but you jumped into politics and it wasn't an easy ride all the time. So you're talking right now about how you were prepared for it. What did you feel you were not necessarily prepared for, or that would have been a challenge for anybody going into that situation?
Oh my God. Okay. So it was a steep learning curve, because the city machine is ginormous. So any city machine is complex, like any kind of large city, like Longueuil would be complex, Brassard would be complex, Laval, Montreal, of course, is no exception. We have 28,000 employees. And the hierarchy and the organization and how things work and understanding, there are so many things that are implicit that people kept talking about as though I would understand, but it took me 3 years to finally get everything that was implicit. So it is a complex machine to understand, and while an elected official doesn't actually work in that machine, if you understand it, then you can better orient, because an elected official's job is to give the vision, to give ideas, or to say we want to make our way to this objective. I'm pointing off screen, and then the civil servants and the city machine finds the way to do that according to who's there, like their finances, their who works there, their skills and experience, and their organizational culture. So that was, I think, something that, and you have to learn in the city. When you're in the city, you can't learn it, you can't learn it theoretically, because each city is different, right? So I think regardless of background, that is a huge learning curve. Thank God we have colleagues who help out and stuff. But because when I was elected, our party came to power. We weren't just elected, like our leader, the party leader became mayor. And so a lot of colleagues were not available, actually, because they were busy running the city. So also, when you're elected and you're elected into power, it's a different game than when you're elected and you're elected into the opposition, where you have a lot more time to learn. So let's just say we were like, for a year and a half, I was just running and just trying to understand everything, all the acronyms, all the. So I think that's, by year 3 I'm comfortable, but it took that long. So
Yeah.
that was.
What about like relationships between people? Is that something that's okay to ask you? Did how did those either promote or your learning, or be a challenge to you, or
Definitely.
did you feel well supported by the people around you?
Yeah, I mean, you have to go out and find your crew,
Yeah.
sort of like when you go to CJEP, and if you don't know anyone, you got to find your crew. Like the way when you go anywhere, you have to find your group, your friends, your colleagues. So because maybe you're working on something that, how it works in Montreal is we have boroughs, 19 of them, plus the city, and they each have different responsibilities. And I work mostly in the borough, but maybe I'll be working on an issue that I alone am working on in the borough. So then I try to go find someone who's working on it somewhere else to give me ideas, to bounce ideas off of. How did you work with it organizationally? Was it through, just ask questions, just so there's that way of supporting each other. Of course, we support each other because we have a lot of, just like any other job, there's always like official meetings where where we do idea work, or where we make decisions about, next steps for something we're funding, for a program, for whatever. But then there's also all the informal stuff that is harder virtually now, but like hallway chat and things like that, lunchtime, and that's where a lot of the support is built, is in those informal moments. And we're a political party. So political party, the great advantage is that you kind of have built-in support. You kind of have a built-in group, and then within it you have like the people that you really love, and of course we're all human, but the political party, that's a great advantage, is that built-in support with staff who share the same objectives and who support us every day. Like if Emmanuelle is still here, she's a great support. She's a staffer in Rosemont, and her job is to make sure our objectives and our goals and our ambitions are met. She helps us with media. She helps us with civil servants, with citizens, so.
Okay. So our focus in this class is environmental sustainability. And I know that that's sort of it's part of what you hold dear as well as an individual. How did that play out in your role as a city councillor?
Well, definitely as a geographer and as a city councillor and as a member of Projet Montréal. So for sure, sustainability. I get a bit of eco anxiety when my child gets like a big plastic toy. I'm like, what do we do with this plastic? I can't recycle it once it breaks. So definitely it's something that we live with and is in our hearts and our heads every day. So in Rosemont, we recently created what we call an all ages, all abilities bike lane. And I noticed in your talk, I watched that TED talk that you all were assigned and watched, I'm sure. Super interesting. And the speaker talks about urban form and about mobility and about walking and about biking. And walking and biking is only going to be sustainable across the island and across the metropolitan region, which includes, Longueuil, Brossard, lots of the South Shore. It's only going to be sustainable if everyone can do it safely. If it's just the 40-year-old dudes in spandex who go up the mountain 5 times in a row and they're athletic, well, it's not going to be sustainable. So we created an all ages, all abilities bike lane. It means that people in wheelchairs can take it, bikers, strollers. We're seeing like a lot of multifunction that we didn't even imagine at first. It's super, super wide. It's like over 2 meters wide. I take it with my 5-year-old. When he went to daycare, he would scoot 2 kilometers to daycare in this bike lane, and people could pass. So it makes room for different ages, as I've said, abilities. I've never seen so many seniors bike. I've never seen so many women bike, and I've never seen so many families. So what we're seeing is a diversification of who bikes, why they bike. So not just for pleasure, but for transit. And sometimes it's both. You can go to work or school and have fun at the same time. And it changes everything. When you have safe infrastructure, the way we have safe roads, it makes it better for cars. Safe bike infrastructure changes everything. It really encourages people to make that shift in a sustainable way. So that's one example. It's really hard to do that. There's going to be people complaining and finding it difficult to adjust because we did remove parking to make it possible. However, when we think of climate change, which is big challenges. So I think that when the challenges are so great, the solutions will certainly hurt a little bit. And it's totally okay to be uncomfortable with the change. And we realize that, but our bet is that in 5 years, mobility in the borough will have changed considerably because of this first infrastructure. Parks is another way we think about it. So parks is really important to not just think about it as these patches on a map, like green spaces on a map, but what we've been doing for this past year in the borough is really trying to connect the different spaces, streams and wetlands. I mean, we don't have wetlands, but we're trying to connect our spaces to these other spaces to create a continuum of nature. So within each park, when we reinvest in a park, we try to think of biodiversity, not just grass and trees. So try to think of like richness in vertical biodiversity. We try to think of animals and insects, and then we map it like what green spaces can we connect to? What are the big important green spaces? Do we think maybe we need to, like, we're going to be introducing a street, what we call a rivière sèche. I don't know what it is in English, but it's like to catch rainwater, and it'll be for birds, and it'll be, on their way somewhere else that's humid, that has water. So that's one way, is seeing parks not just for leisure or sports or just for humans. Actually, it's to see it as something that's connected in this continuum of nature that doesn't just include us. And that's going to be great for climate change. It's going to be great for our ability to adapt to increasing warmth in the summer. So we need cool spaces. This park is going to have I'm exaggerating, but like a gazillion trees. So it'll definitely be a cool space for people to go to when it's 40 degrees a 6th day in a row. So that's another way. I don't know. I can give maybe more examples. Maybe that's enough.
Maybe one more example would be great, and then we can. Yeah.
I had prepared parks. Oh yeah, another way. So another way of thinking of sustainability. So sustainability is, like, for me anyway, how I think of it is this solution going to work in the long term, like regarding climate change? But for it to work in the long term, everybody has to be able to be part of the solution. So another way is to work on what we call ableism, and that is discriminations related to capacity. So we often think of it as, discriminations against persons with handicaps. And so we have to think about that when it's an extra layer, or it's an extra element of complexity, because the world is complex. So when we do the bike lanes, or when we do the parks, or when we redo a street, or when we're thinking of a bylaw for how we design buildings and the requirements, so it's always about bringing in, like, this is something I try to do, like ableism, or bring in anti-racism. So try to think about all these things, but also through social lens. And who has not historically been part of this environmental sustainability movement, maybe? And do we need to reconsider, who we were considering? So to try to think about our angle mort, our blind spots, is all, it's not a project. It's sometimes a project unto itself, in the sense that you have to read about it, you have to talk to people about it, because you got to kind of change the way your brain is functioning, and then you're able to bring it into the fold all the time in everything else you do.
Thanks, Steph, because it was really important. I think in this class, I mentioned to my students, that the social, the economic, and the environmental are the three pillars of sustainability. And we talked about that a lot at the beginning of the semester. But being a class on environmental issues, we always focus on the environmental. And I think that it's really important to sort of like step back for a second and think again about the those social pillars and the economic pillars as well. How long is it going to work for? Who is involved? Those questions are just as important as the environmental benefit in the moment. But I get the feeling that there are lots of things that you could have possibly done, or you would have liked to do. The more we start to think about projects, the more projects we tend to think about. Is there anything that you would have liked to do that you didn't have the opportunity to do?
Oh, every single counselor will tell you, of course. Because, okay, so I went into politics because I had a lot of ideas. And I hung out with people who had a lot of ideas. And then you arrive and it's like, well, we can't do 1,000 ideas this year. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we didn't do. But one thing I wanted to do was I wanted the city somewhere to have what we call an adventure playground for children. And adventure playgrounds are, they come out of the UK. They're basically spaces where kids between the ages of like 8 and 13, I would say, it's a junk playground. They call it a scrap yard, basically. And kids can do what they want and build, and there's risky play, and there's play workers there who are just there to make sure that everything is safe. They know the difference between danger and risk. And it's the kind of thing we don't have here. And it's the kind of thing I think, well, we did have 50 years ago in Montreal, but we don't have anymore. And it's a kind of amenity that I think kids would adore. But it's something that has to kind of also be ground up. And so that's something I didn't get to do, but I work on play, children's play, teens belonging in public space and parks all the time. And so I think sometimes you don't get to do, you don't get to, let's say, build the thing you wanted to build, but you get to talk about it a lot. And you get to have new discussions and conversations, and people who never thought about this hear about it, talk about it, consider it. So I try to go to events and go to panels, and I really try to spread the word. And I think that that's part of the work. I think a lot of the work is also discursive. We used to talk about transportation, which was all about the modes of transportation. Now we talk about mobility, which is how humans move. So we went from, infrastructure centric to human centric. And that's because also of discursive change, and it matters. How we talk matters, and what we talk about matters. So I don't think that all those efforts are all worthwhile, for sure.
Yeah, I love the idea of adventure playgrounds, by the way. I think those are very cool. The idea of having a little bit more independence for kids, like having places where young people can go and be less supervised, and less sort of,
Yeah,
boxed in by rules and
yeah,
regulations, I think is
yeah,
very important. It promotes
yeah,
creativity, in this really basic way.
yeah.
Um, so that's a really cool idea. I didn't know that. I think that that's so neat. So what about people who would like to be like you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any advice? Would you be able to sort of like come out with a piece of advice or two for people who would like to become a city councillor, who would like to become just involved,
Yeah,
even if it's not through being a city councillor. You went through so many different steps.
yeah,
What do people do if they want to be involved in a really basic way, and
yeah.
then sort of as you move up?
Well, this year's perfect year to be involved because it's an election year in all municipalities in Quebec. So, perfect way. What I did was I looked at the different parties in my city. Not all cities have parties, but LaSalle has a few parties. Kind of Longueuil does too. Or just look at who are your counselors or who are people that have announced themselves as candidates. And if any of those people or parties seem interesting, they're always looking for volunteers. Honestly, politics works by having volunteers, armies of motivated people. So that's one thing you can do. And when you're a volunteer, I mean, you can learn so many things in the party system. And being on a campaign is so fun. It can be so exhilarating. You get to, if you want to meet people, you can go out and do canvassing door to door. You can flyer, you can do events, you can call people to eventually know how they're going to vote. You hang up poster like a pancarte. There's a thousand things to do as a volunteer in a party. So that's one way you can start. You can also just start in your community. People in politics have often been involved one way or another in their community. So whether that's, a lot of people are, business people might be through their business association or the chambre de commerce or something like that, and they have chambre de commerce pour les jeunes, so whatever your interest is, honestly, go find a way to engage it, not just professionally, but or if you can't professionally, then through volunteer. I couldn't professionally. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was trying to figure out like what would be my next job, and I just did volunteer, and eventually it led here. So sometimes you have to be strategic, but sometimes just being somewhere is you're going to see opportunities emerge, just being in the right place. I often have done that in my life, and I don't do it consciously, but I just put myself in a place, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to stand here, take up room, and I think something could eventually happen. And it does. So whatever is your interest, and don't think like, oh, this isn't, this interest isn't prestigious enough, or it's not whatever enough, because the thing that you love the most is what's going to make you shine. It's what you're going to be able to access your authentic self, which is always attractive. People are very attracted to authentic people. Like, they want to work with them, they want to hang out with them. Somebody's calling me.
Do you want me to pause the recording? Oh, you want me to pause?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, I'm just
Thanks.
gonna pause for a sec. And we're back on. Okay.
Oh, right. I was talking about, yeah. So I think that's the best way, is to go with whatever your interest is, and then find an opportunity, whether it's in your community garden, the community center, a political party. I can think of 1,000 examples, but and then you'll meet people, and they're going to know people, and it's really, some things you can't learn in school, so it's best to, it's great to combine them.
Thanks for pointing that out here, Steph.
No,
That's
but
no, I'm teasing. Oh, okay, good. So what do you think of like your experiences? What is the thing that you think is most important to explain or communicate about like sustainability in an urban area? So this is something you've thought a lot about, that you've worked a lot about. Is there anything that you think you can pinpoint? You can choose more than one thing if you want, but that you could pinpoint for students or just for young people in general and say, this is really important. Think about this.
why environmental sustainability is really important?
No, but like an element of it. Yeah.
Oh, an element of it.
Yeah. I think like they're getting a lot of the why it's important in this class. But like, is
Yeah.
there something specifically about like your experiences that you can say, hey, if we think critically about this, this is
Yeah.
something that we make a big impact with.
Oh, form, urban form, urban form.
Yeah.
The best form is the one where we have so much freedom that we can choose to go places by different modes, and even by the same mode, different, like not just one bus line, but 3 bus lines, not just one metro, but 2 metro stops, not just one bike path, but several bike paths. The way we have several roads, and we have, in but not all municipalities, sidewalks. So I think form, and that is all linked to form. That is all linked to form. So mobility and form go together. And I think those two things are interesting on so many levels. Of course, how we build, but also how cities have revenues. It's all linked to revenues. So property taxes are linked to how we build, what we build. Often it's just easier to say, yeah, go ahead, build in the wetlands. Like we had one borough, Montreal, wanted to build 6,000 units in wetlands. In wetlands, like, yeah, you might get money now if you build in the wetlands, but then you have no more wetlands. Like, so to think about form allows you to think about taxation and revenue and governmental affairs and relations between different levels of government. It allows you to think about ecosystems, natural ecosystems, the, how we call it, green infrastructure, but all the benefits of wetlands, of forests, microforests, of, in French, we call it des friches, des boisés, all of these things, You can also think about mobility. You can also think about community, because how we build affects community, how we relate as humans. We can overcome our environment in a way, like we can adjust to it, and we can adapt to it, and we can try to compensate. But definitely, during COVID in Montreal, and in the metropolitan region, the obstacles were, the challenge was how to get people not to all hang out in the same park. And then I was talking with elected officials in Gaspésie, and they're like, or in northern Quebec, I was talking with elected officials all over Quebec through this board I sit on, and they were saying, us, it's the opposite. Everybody has their own yard, so nobody is anywhere together ever. So we have people who are missing out and isolated and missing out on community for a year now. So form affects how we socialize, how communities are built. It also affects children's belonging. The more cars you have, the bigger cars there are, the less children belong in what, like at large. Like they might belong in their backyard, in their schoolyard, in their daycare yard, and at the park, but forget linking those places, forget their autonomy from their parents or other adults. So for me, form is like, it's not everything, but it's so much.
That's great. Thank you so much. I would like to open up to the students for a little bit. So does anybody here have anything that you would like to say, or a question that you have for Stephanie? You guys can just unmute yourselves or put your hands up. Yeah, I know it's early in the morning for questions.
I have a question. So if we're trying to go, be more sustainable and all of that, what would be your advice for like people who live at home, like most of us, I guess, but are still under like the parents' rules? So let's say if the parents don't want to do compost, then rip, I guess you're not doing compost, right? So that can be more challenging when you want to engage in it, but at the same time, it's not really your choice too much sometimes.
Definitely being a model. I think that what I'm learning, I'm 40 and I feel old in the sense that your generation I find so inspiring. There's so many things that people my age and older are struggling with that for you is just normal and like getting on with life. And so I always look back, or not back because I don't want to say it that way, but I always look to your generation like, okay, what what are they talking about? How are they seeing this? And then that helps me, I gauge where I'm at. Like, oh my God, am I some old fogey and I'm way too old school and I gotta like adjust? So I would say be a model and go get the compost bin at your city. You need a proof of residence. You don't need to be a homeowner. You can go get the bin and then you can start doing it. Like I know that when I was a 9-year-old, recycling became a big thing. And all the kids from the 80s and the 90s remember that. And we were the ones who told our parents, like, get on with putting your cans in the bin. We led the change. And so I would say you lead the change. You do it. Yeah, your parents don't want to do it. They're not going to be around. Like I say this in the most respectful way, but it is the youngest people today who will live the greatest consequences for the longest time. And so we owe it to them to be exemplary. And if you take leadership, well, I'm sure your parents will be like, okay, we'll get on board. I definitely think the home is a place where so much change can happen. You know, we talked a lot about politics and that's in public space. So much stuff is happening in the home as well. So I encourage you wholeheartedly.
Anybody else? Oh, sorry, Edith, you were going to say something.
I was just saying thank you.
Very important. Well done. Does anybody else have a question for Stephanie? Yeah. I can also stop the recording at this point. Hold on one second.